This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. In late 1999, writers Jeph Loeb and Joe Kelly took on Superman. Over the next 2 years, they would upgrade his city, test his heart, warp his reality, elect his greatest enemy, and bring intergalactic war to his doorstep. It's the final chapter in the Triangle era, one of my most cherished runs, and the subject of a 7-part Digging for Kryptonite epic. It's the Loeb-Kelly era. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Superman's return to Krypton during the Loeb-Kelly era is veteran Superman podcaster and returning guest, Michael Bailey. Welcome back, my friend.
I was going to do a whole bit of, so are we discussing the Silver Age return to Krypton? Are we discussing the John Byrne, Mike Mignola story from Superman number 18? I mean, which version of the, but obviously we're talking about the one from the era you're discussing. So no, but thank you for having me, and thank you for having me on for this one, because it brought back some memories.
And to the bit that you almost did, which version of Krypton we're talking about is really at the heart of this. So we'll get into it. Let me ask you a general question, though, about the Loeb-Kelly era, because on one of your Superman podcasts, From Crisis to Crisis, I believe most recently you covered The Wedding. So you're still a few years away from the start of the Loeb-Kelly era, but eventually you'll get there, and we look forward to that coverage. I'm curious, what hopes, predictions, expectations do you have for yourself when you revisit the run in full for your podcast when you get there?
I am hoping that I enjoy parts of it more than I did at the time. When that run hit, it was, I don't want to say it was jarring, because it's not like it came out of nowhere, because by that point this dates it, I had gotten online, because this was an era where you had to make a decision to get on the internet, whereas now I just pick up my phone and do it. And I started dipping into the worlds of online fandom and the message boards, and I remember specifically Jeph Loeb posting on the DC boards. And the one line that stuck with me was, Superman will throw down with the heavy hitters of the DC universe. And I'm like, oh, that's bold. That seems to be saying something about how the changes that are coming. But it's also wrapped up in, like, when I started dating my wife too, because it was like right around the same time. So I have such fond memories of the era. I have such fond memories of the start of everything. But listening to your coverage, there's so much I've forgotten, because it was 25 years ago. And what I think really has come through, and especially in reading the stories that we did, because these are, I don't want to call them outliers of the era, but they kind of are in a really weird way. I mean, they introduce, especially the first Return to Krypton does introduce elements that'll carry over into the rest of at least Loeb's run. But like, none of the other supporting characters are in it except for Jonathan Kent. Literally just Jonathan Kent in both of them. And even Lois is off the table in the second one, which I'll get to my disappointment in that. But it's just struck me how much, why I still love the stories that I still love. Like, this gave me hope that when I revisit this, that it's not going to be like an awful time. It's going to be a Sinbad contract, which I always point to, because Jeph and I were not looking forward to covering the Sinbad contract when we got to it in the 1990 books, and we ended up having a ball and loving it. So I'm hoping it's going to be more like that.
Good, good. Well, I appreciate getting your perspective on this era as a whole. And as far as what we're here to talk about specifically, this kicked off with Superman 166 in January 2001 by Jeph Loeb and Ed McGuinness. Great, classic, I think iconic cover of Superman standing in front of an exploding Krypton. And on the one side, you have the post-crisis John Byrne version of Jor-El, Lara, and the Rocket. And on the other side, you have the Silver Age version. And that visually represents this journey that we're going on. And essentially in that prelude issue, we get this revelation that the Krypton that we have known, that Superman has known for the post-crisis era, is not in fact the true Krypton. Krypton wasn't this cold, sterile place, but rather was a place of warmth and wonder. It was effectively the Silver Age version of Krypton. And then we get this 4-part storyline a month later, Return to Krypton, appropriately titled, where Superman and Lois travel to this version of Krypton in the Phantom Zone and have their adventure. There are a couple of crypto-centric stories that follow after that we'll touch on. And then over a year later, we get a sequel, Return to Krypton II, where, spoiler alert, folks, we find out that that Silver Age version of Krypton in the Phantom Zone was actually all a ruse, a trap created and designed by Brainiac 13 to trap and destroy Superman. So we get a very, very interesting idea introduced here and explored over a pair of 4-issue story arcs, but then they put the genie back in the bottle. And I'm so curious to get your take on this because I appreciate all of this in a way that I didn't even just a few years ago when we talked about this on the show. But reading it now, I think what I keep coming back to is specifically the first batch of stories we're talking about, Superman 166, and then the first Return to Krypton. What a clean, effective, elegant way to move away from the post-crisis John Byrne version of Krypton in a way that doesn't just completely discard it, but makes it a story point. And it felt like reading those initial stories, it really felt like DC, or at least these creators, were committed to that idea. That was the sense that I had. And then it felt like a year plus later when we got to Return to Krypton 2, clearly somebody had changed their mind and wanted to put that genie back in the bottle. So I welcome your thoughts on this. I don't know if you have any behind the scenes insight into this, but at a minimum, I'm very curious what your reaction was and what you were able to gauge of the reaction of others as this was happening.
This is one of those situations where time heals a lot of wounds. Because when this was happening back in 2001, and what sweet summer children we were, we really were. And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the people that were like me that were like super into the message boards and online and engaged, which I know now is a very small percentage of the reading audience of the time. But when you're living in a bubble, everything seems dramatic. And we all flipped out when this was happening. Just like there was, in Star Wars where Obi-Wan kind of sits down and Luke's like, what? He's like, I felt like 1,000 voices called out once and were suddenly silenced. I think the people at DC in my dramatic recreation of this felt that when because we were not, I don't think most of the audience, and again, I'm only speaking of the limited people that I was exposed to. So I have a sense of self about that, but we did not want a new origin. We did not want the origin to be rolled back. We were okay with this origin because it's the origin we had by this point. What was it? 16 years?
Yeah.
Had been. And I was of the generation that wasn't around when John Byrne's thing happened. So I didn't go through those growing pains and had to deal with all of that. But it's really interesting when you look at the evolution of Superman's origin in the 21st century. They do this, And then, like you said, a year later, no, we were. It was all Brainiac 13. Swear to God, guys, seriously, we're not redoing the origin. And then, literally, a little over a year after that, we get Birthright. And then this time, they're like, no, this time, this is the for real origin. And that lasted 2 years. And then we didn't get an official origin until 2010. And then a year later, they revamped the entire thing. So that's why coming back to the story now is just like, I could appreciate everything they're doing so much more
Yes.
than me at the time yelling into the void about how I didn't want this.
Okay. So this is fascinating. So a few things. One, you know how much I love Superman Birthright, but I was thinking about how with that, yes, we got a different version of Krypton, but it was just this new story. It was just like, oh, hey, this is what Krypton was now. And like you said, it didn't stick, unfortunately. Still a great story and it holds up. But I guess what I appreciated here in these stories from the Loeb Kelly era, at least there was an attempt to address it and reconcile it in story. Mm-hmm. So that carried a lot of weight for me. But going back to the reaction that you had back in the day, so it seems like a lot of it hinged on the fact that the origin that was in place was well settled and you were used to it. I guess my follow-up question is, did any of that have to do with, or did your reaction have to do with actually liking the John Byrne version of Krypton? Like, did you have a particular attachment to that, or was it more just, no, like I'm just used to it?
At the time, yes. Now, it's our Facebook status would be relationship status would be it's complicated, and a lot has to do with the fact that over the last 25 years, I have one, as I said, DC has revamped the character on several occasions, but two, my concept of who Superman is and what his origin is has opened up as well. And John Byrne is the one that got me into the books. And now when I look back at his version of Krypton, there are things I like about it, but I cannot sit here and tell you that that is my preferred version of it. But in 2001, I was rock solid a post-crisis kid. Like everything about it, I loved. And it was the Bible to me. So at the time, I can honestly say it was because I liked it. But I think looking back now, the writing was on the wall that things were changing. And one of the things that I find fascinating that I was thinking of when I was reading this is that this is pre-DiDio coming into DC. So this is really the last gasps of that late 90s era of DC just in general. But for Superman, I mean, we all heard at the time and read in Wizard magazine the rumors of the Tom Peyer, Grant Morrison, Mark Waid. Who's the fourth guy? Was it Mark Miller?
Yeah.
Mark Miller revamp. And the moment I read they were getting rid of the marriage, I was morally opposed to it in a way that a 23-year-old guy can be morally opposed to something that means nothing ultimately. So there was, I admit that a lot of my rage was based in being in my early 20s and not knowing anything but thinking I knew everything. But going into this, I was not really seeing that things were changing. And so every little change felt almost like a personal attack. And that is not healthy.
No.
So it's not that I didn't enjoy it. It's like I love Loeb. Loeb's in my Mount Rushmore of Superman writers. So there's that. But Loeb and Kelly's books were always the ones that I looked forward to. And so there was enough there that I was just like, okay, this feels a little squidgy, but I'm okay. But when we got to this, I'm like, you guys are going over the reservation here. I don't like this. I don't want this. What are you doing, DC? Which, is a rational question to ask.
Okay. No, I can appreciate all of that. I was really thinking about trying to remember what my thoughts and feelings were about this at the time, because at the beginning of 2001, I'm not even a full decade into my Superman fan journey at that point. I had read Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries by that point, and certainly aspects of his version of Krypton were part of the book. So not unlike yourself, I was used to it. But even when I had read his Man of Steel, I didn't have the frame of reference. I didn't have the context. I didn't know at the time what a departure that was from the version of Krypton that we had before. So that was just the version of Krypton I always knew. At the same time, and I was really trying to sort this out, like what I made of all of this when I read Superman 166, because clearly I had seen other versions of Krypton, specifically in the Christopher Reeve film series, and probably even on a more impactful level, Superman the Animated Series, that 3-part series premiere and that version of Krypton. So I guess on some level, I was aware there are different ways to present Krypton. On the comic book side, the Byrne one was all that I knew. At the same time, I wasn't particularly attached to it per se, but it definitely registered to me when I was reading 166 back in the day. It definitely registered like, oh, this is a big deal. Like this notion that the version of Krypton we always knew wasn't actually that. Now, did it register that what we were being presented with as the one true version was the Silver Age iteration? No, right? That was kind of, I think, largely lost on me. But in the end, I guess it didn't really matter too much because the contrast was there, and the contrast was very clear. And the hook of this, the reason why, like we said, ultimately this all turns out to not be the case, but at the outset of this, the reason that Jor-El gives for this false version of Krypton was he wanted Kal-El to be able to put the past behind him and acclimate fully to his new world and not dwell on the past and what could have been, which is an interesting commentary on the, on the Byrne version of Krypton and its cold sterility. And as I've now experienced many, if not most of the versions of Krypton that we've gotten over the years, is the Silver Age version my favorite? Not necessarily. Is the Byrne version my least favorite? Yeah, probably fair to say.
Yeah, and when you look at the Byrne version, it's hard to sit there and defend it as being superior in any way. And again, that hurts as a guy that Byrne is the one that won what brung me to this. But when you look at it, it was designed specifically for you to not like it.
Right.
If you read interviews with Byrne from the time, there's this Amazing Heroes, which was a magazine at the time, had this gigantic, extensive interview with both Marv Wolfman and John Byrne. And he was just, he said that Wendy Pini, who was one of the creators of ElfQuest, said that you created a Krypton that deserves to blow up. And at the time, I just accepted that. When I first started reading it, it's just something like I had more of a frame of reference because I had read some pre-crisis stuff, and I continued to kind of delve into that over the years. But at the same time, I was really stuck in that this continuity is going to be the continuity forever. So, but when you look back at the Byrne Krypton, like everything else, it's the stuff people did with it after he left that makes it interesting.
100%. Yeah.
Like
all the Eradicator business.
Yeah. Eradicator, the Chem-L stuff, the stuff that Mark Schultz did during this run, but even kind of before that. And, the creation of the new Fortress of Solitude in 1990. Like, I enjoy the World of Krypton miniseries that Byrne wrote because I think it's an interesting backstory, but it's still not something like to hang your hat on as like, oh, this is the Krypton that I prefer. And so looking at it now, I see that if this was a legitimate attempt, because I've spoken to Jeph Loeb 2 times, you would think in those 2 times I would have asked this question. But it just never came up. And I've met Joe Kelly as well. And you would think, again, this would be the top question I would ask, but circumstances created other questions to be asked. So if it ever comes up again, I'm definitely like, before I do anything else, I'm going to say, look, before we talk about anything, was this supposed to be the actual factual origin change? And did you guys get pushback? And is that why it changed? Because I do know from Loeb that this isn't a tangent, but it has to do with like their thinking at the time. None of them liked the triangle system. None of them did. And Loeb, when Steve and I interviewed him for Radio KO Live back in like 2012, we were talking about this, and he basically, they were pushing to get rid of it because they wanted to tell their own stories. They were okay working like on Emperor Joker or Critical Condition or Our Worlds at War, but they were kind of hamstrung by this system. And looking back, I don't blame them. So, but to circle back to your question, or to your point about Byrne's Krypton, it is the least likable version of Krypton. Like I'm the guy that says, can we really get away from the 1978 version, please? Can we stop going back to that well? But even that has more life in a weird way than Burns did. Not again what the creators did after him. But Byrne's Krypton is just it's design by its very design, you're supposed to hate it. So how are you ever going to defend it or love it? And why were we hanging on to it? Is what I want to ask 23-year-old me.
No, I hear you. And I think that is a key point, that Krypton was unlikable by design, and it went hand in hand with Byrne's whole vision for the character, that we were now going to have this emphasis on the humanity, the human side. Clark is who he actually is. And we've talked about Byrne before, and we'll be doing more again, not too far from now. So I won't go too far down the Byrne rabbit hole here. But I guess where I've ultimately landed after all these years and looking at his work and the stories around it is, I do think that the underlying instinct in the Byrne run to focus on the humanity was a good one, and it formed the basis of the character I grew up with. Like you were getting at, there's a lot more that was added to the mythology and the character in the years that followed. That's ultimately where my heart lies, but it started with that Man of Steel reboot. So if nothing else, I always have and have to have respect and appreciation for that Man of Steel reboot, even if it's not necessarily the most enjoyable for me per se, and I have specific objections like this version of Krypton. But I did think very much in keeping with what that whole take on the character was. I think the bridge too far for me with this Krypton is Kal-El not being born on Krypton, but rather leaving in that birthing matrix and ultimately being quote unquote born on Earth. That's probably the one aspect that I still can really never get behind, because I feel like it just robs the Krypton portion of the story of such an emotionally resonant piece.
Yeah.
All that to say, Superman 166, we get this twist, this big twist, and it starts on the Kent farm. And this is an issue. We've been talking about how virtually every issue of the Loeb Superman title is narrated by a member of the supporting cast. And this one is Pa Kent. Pa's not in the story a ton, and even his narration fades away for a good chunk of it, but it's there at the beginning. And I love this because he's talking about how there are certain sounds that you can never get out of your head that stay with you your whole life. And if you hear them or something close to them, it takes you right back. Not to get too personal or put you on the spot, is there anything that comes to mind? Like when you were reading that, is there anything that you're like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. It's this for me.
Yes, some not really positive. In 2002, my wife fell down the back steps and broke her ankle. And there was a scream that was very specific. There is my dog Boo snoring in my lap while I'm recording my early podcast, stuff like that. And that, I think people unfairly criticize Jeph Loeb as a writer because I think they're judging things done later in the 2000s that were maybe a little more commercial. But that the way he is able to make characters, specifically Jonathan Kent, say things in their narration that instantly bonds you to them. In For All Seasons, it's just like I would sit there and watch him looking at the ants and stuff like that. And I know from that's stuff that he was taking from his own experiences as a father watching his son. So Loeb to me is just one of those writers that is able to do blockbuster type storytelling, but he's also able to grab you and make you feel like you're reading about a real person. And I love, and it felt like coming home reading the Jonathan Kent narration. It really did. I was just grinning ear to ear because it just made me so happy. I'm like, yes, this is why I loved his work.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And that particular issue is called Fathers. And of course, we have Pa Kent narrating, and then we get essentially two versions of Jor-El. The whole business about the sounds, the thing that I instantly went to is the night my son was born, because leading up to it, the doctors had said, like, you know, it's not always like in the movies. The kids don't always come out crying, right? So if it's quiet at first, it's okay, right? Don't be worried. They're, you know, preparing us. So we were like, oh, okay, like good to know. You know, we're not going to expect wailing necessarily. You know, we'll see. This kid came out screaming. I mean, even the doctor said, another thing I remember is the doctor saying, wow, a set of lungs on him. Like, he just came out. So like, that's a sound that has always stayed with me. And if I were to hear something similar, I know I would be right back in that hospital room in 2019. So that made me think of that. But, and, you know, we don't have to go beat by beat through the entire thing, but the setup here is that this green glowing rocket crash lands. It's the same sound that Jonathan heard the first time when Clark's rocket arrived some 30 some odd years ago. And it ultimately reduces to this green crystal, not unlike what we saw in the Christopher Reeve film series. And we get this image of Jor-El, but the familiar Jor-El that we know. And so Superman takes this crystal, or isobar, as they call it, to Emil Hamilton and John Henry Irons. And there had been some setup for this in the books, particularly in Man of Steel in the months leading up to it. Actually, as far back as early Loeb Kelly era, Schultz introduced this idea of Superman gifting John Henry this ore that he had pulled down from outer space. Mm-hmm. And it had these unusual properties. And then Emil Hamilton came back into the picture, and he started working with John Henry at Steelworks. And I think they used that ore in their devices or whatnot, and they started picking up Kryptonian signals from the Phantom Zone. So they were seeding this in the books in the months leading up to this. But Superman brings them this isobar, and Hamilton has already devised this thought projection apparatus that they strap Superman into, and it's able to essentially beam the contents of that crystal into his mind. And so that allows him to have this vision, this visitation with Jor-El, and starts out as the traditional post-crisis version of Jor-El, who's asking for forgiveness for withholding the truth. And then he morphs into this Silver Age version. And we get our look at the classic Silver Age-esque version of Krypton. We're on Kryptonopolis, the city of Kryptonopolis, and we see the classic moments of Jor-El arguing with the council. He's noticed that Krypton's orbit is out of whack and the planet's getting closer to the red sun, and eventually it's going to pull the planet apart. And one of the members is like, oh, you're stressed, Jor-El. You need some rest. And then you have Zod, military leader Zod, who thinks that this is all, or claims that this is all some plot by Jor-El, a ploy to seize control by getting the current leadership of the planet off the board. And we see the planet start to explode, and the familiar scene of Jor-El and Lara placing the baby in the rocket. Reconciling both versions, though, we have the Silver Age version, that blue rocket, the booster rocket, but there's a chamber within that contains the birthing matrix. One thing that came back with this that I was not happy about, and I've talked about this before, this notion, and it changes telling to telling. Sometimes this plays out, sometimes it doesn't. But the notion that there's enough room in the rocket for Lara and she refuses to go, please, can we never have this again? As a parent now, especially, it's insane to me.
I prefer that than to the very early ones where Jor-El was trying to get Lara to hop in the rocket, and Lara's like, "No, maybe we should send the kid."
Okay, so, fair enough. That's okay. That's the worst. Okay.
But it's funny talking about what we were talking about before about Byrne's version of Krypton and why it doesn't hold up. It just really occurred to me how powerful that origin is. There is something mythic and timeless that you can do it in any version. I mean, and it's been proven time and again, from the 1978 movie to Russell Crowe in Man of Steel, standing before a council and saying our planet is doomed. There is that in the Byrne version, but he had to backstop it in the World of Krypton miniseries. And then during Final Night, Louise Simonson and John Bogdanove did a version of it that was much better, I would say. But there's something about that. And there is something about that series of events. Maybe, and you can change the trappings, but that series of events that makes the story of Superman so tragic is that Jor-El was trying to convince them otherwise. And for whatever reason, usually arrogance, they don't believe him. And so he has to send his child away. And none of that is in the Byrne version in Man of Steel #1. And that's the that's the thing of every time I've seen like flashbacks of Lara and Jor-El of that era being romantically involved, I'm like, that was never on the page, y'all. No. So reading this version of it, I was just like, how awesome was it for Jeph Loeb to sit there and get to write that scene? And how awesome did it look by Ed McGuinness?
Yeah, it's so good. And I guess at the time I didn't know how much I should appreciate it. Like I said, even though I knew I had seen other versions of the movie and the cartoon, but I didn't know exactly what I was missing on the comic book front. And so I have even more appreciation for it now that we were able, at least temporarily in the story, to bring back those elements, those dynamics, because I agree. I think mythic is a perfect word. And look, with this whole Byrne vision for the character, I mean, I think you can have your cake and eat it too. You can focus on more of Clark's human side and the man, and Clark is who he is and Superman is what he can do. But you don't have to shortchange or undermine the Krypton side of it in order to achieve that emphasis on the humanity. I feel like you can have the best of both worlds.
But the problem with Byrne as a creator is that he has such a very arrogant view that his way is the right way. And you said shortchanging. He shortchanged so much. One of the things that I've really flipped upon is how upsetting it is that his Superman had no interest in his background once he found out that up until he was 18, that's fine because he thinks that he's the biological son of Jonathan Martha Kent. I still say in that version that there's a bunch of people in Smallville that every once in a while have a conversation. Do you all remember a drifter coming through town around 9 months before that happened? Because Clark looks nothing like them.
Right.
In any sense. But he shortchanged everything about that element. And it's almost insulting at this point when I think about it. That, because I have talked to so many people that were adopted that hated that. That, and it's not something that I had, not a perspective I had, but now that I've heard it again and again and again, I'm like, yeah, what the hell, Byrne? So you say having an appreciation, reading it now, I feel bad at my behavior back in 2001. I really do. And and I felt the same way when I reread New Krypton a couple of years ago. It's just like, oh, I see what you're going for now. I just couldn't see it then because I was too wrapped up in my own self about it. So
Look,
yeah,
don't be too hard on yourself, because we have all been there as Superman fans or fans of whatever we like, and there's certain things that we get hung up on and we feel very strongly about, and I would take it as a positive, as I've experienced this myself, where all right, maybe couldn't get past something at the time, but the fact that you've been willing to revisit material and your perspective has shifted and opened up, I mean, that's a great thing. Not everybody achieves that.
yeah,
So don't be too hard on yourself. But yeah, no, I think over the course of doing this podcast, I think one of the things that maybe has shifted the most in terms of how I look at the character, and I think why it wasn't totally there to begin with, is because of the era I grew up in, and this template that Byrne had established, is the importance of Clark, Kal-El, Superman truly being a product of two worlds.
yes,
And I think that balance really is important. And that was lost really for a period of time. So something like this really just feels very refreshing in a lot of ways. And so after this vision of this Silver Age iteration of Krypton, Hamilton floats the idea that you might be able to go home again, right? Teeing up our Return to Krypton storyline. Now, interestingly, in Superman 166, there's a couple of pages where we cut to the White House, where newly elected President Luthor is introducing his cabinet picks. And we mentioned that in our President Lex episode recently. In the early 2000s trade paperback that collects Superman 166 and the two Return to Krypton storylines, they just excise those pages from Superman 166. But we do have that. And then we have this final scene on the balcony with Lois and Clark, where he puts forth this notion that he could potentially go, and he's not sure if he should. And Lois is like, are you kidding? Like, this is the story of your career. We're going. And teeing that up, which I have to say, and you were alluding to this earlier, and we'll talk more about it, but Lois being part of the action, well, actually, not just Lois and Lara having as much to do as they do in the first Return to Krypton storyline, to me, is the secret sauce of that four-parter. And that's one of the reasons why the sequel falls flat in a major way for me, because Lois is not in it at all, and Lara is incapacitated for essentially the entire thing. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I love this setup here, this teeing up of the story, that they're going to go together. Really, really like that.
yeah. It's rereading it. One, there were certain images, especially when he's strapped to that machine and then he sees Jor-El and it's kind of out of focus. Those images are kind of seared in my head because I was one of the guys back in the early 2000s that was obsessed with desktop themes, and downloading them and installing them. There was this one dude who went by General Conquest that made top tier desktop themes, because he also included in all the things, not just wallpapers and icons, but screensavers that were basically just the thing you can do now where you can just cycle through images. But he did one for 2000, he did one for 2001, and the one for 2001, those two images popped up in front of my face so many times for years when I had those on my computer. But reading that issue again and seeing that cover and realizing how truly important Ed McGuinness is to this whole era of Superman. I'm not trying to dismiss Duncan Rouleau or Kano, and I will not make any Mortal Kombat jokes. I promise. I desperately want to, but I'm not going to. And nothing against them, but I think that's why it worked so well, is because you had over the top technology. That chair they strap him in, I'm like, how did they build that? Who designed that? What
I know.
And it kind of leveled up Email Hamilton as well, by the way, I think. And then I'm just like, okay, you could just say it's B13 technology, which this isn't going to come up any other place in the episode, but you did ask in the first one how people felt about hated it then, hated it now. 100%. I was against it. I lived through it. I I grin and bear it. But the reason why I didn't like it was if everything around Superman is fantastic looking, Superman looks normal. But if you have a normal cityscape and then there's a dude flying in front of it, that pulls me into the story instead of takes me out. So I was wondering where I was going to take my shot with that. This seemed like a good time for that. So.
All right. No, I hear you. I mean, it's funny. I touched on this, but I never really minded the concept of it because I felt like, okay, the city of tomorrow for the man of tomorrow. And this was a key way to further set the city apart from others in the DC universe and for these creators to put their stamp on it. So I never really minded the idea of it. I get where you're coming from though. I've always had more of a problem. I guess I never felt like it paid off enough, but you know what? In rereading these issues, I disagree with myself. Like, because it comes up enough. Like it comes up a good amount. And then I was saying to myself, how much more would you want them to talk about it? I mean, at a certain point, then that becomes the whole thing. So I feel like it actually comes up in appropriate amount. And I mean, look, there's still more to come with Brainiac 13 in Our Worlds at War and in Return to Krypton 2. And I think more than anything, I guess what I really clocked a little bit more this time around was how Lex is able to leverage his control over the Brainiac 13 technology and the promise of sharing the B13 technology with the rest of the country to win the election. So I don't know. I think overall, I think I'm pretty good now with the City of Tomorrow. By the way, so speaking of moments that we probably wouldn't have another opportunity to talk about this, the B13 technology, correct me if I'm wrong, you might have a sharper memory of this, eventually goes away right after Superman 200, after the Stephen T. Siegel run, right? Was that when they did the whole business with Majestic?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a whole mini series that Chuck Austen wrote before he started writing Action Comics called Superman Metropolis.
Yes.
And that was, it was more focused on Jimmy Olsen and dealing with like the realities of this futuristic city, which, look, I don't like the city to begin with. I don't want you taking a hard, realistic look at it either. That's not going to win me over.
Even if it's written by Chuck Austen?
Yeah. This isn't a video podcast. You didn't see the face I just made, y'all.
You know, I've been toying with / threatening doing an episode on the Chuck Austen stuff. And I keep holding off because the only title that I keep coming to for the episode is too mean. And I can't, I can't, but I don't know. At some point, maybe we will. But yeah, so there was, I do remember that. I owned it. I read it. I don't remember that much about it now, but I know what you're talking about.
It was the transition between the Kelly, Casey, Siegel creative teams into Superstorm, which if people don't remember or weren't around, that was what they named the initiative in 2004 when Rucka came on Adventures of Superman, when the For Tomorrow story that will never go away started, and when Chuck Austen started his run. And Birthright kind of got backtracked into that because Birthright had started before that, but it seemed to be like that, like now they're really pushing this this mini series to be part of it. So, and there was a question mini series that was weird.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
no, I just wanted to mention that for if anyone's wondering, like, oh, whatever happened to the futuristic version of the city? Eventually, that receded. But as we move forward here, you know, it's interesting because, like I said, I do feel like the creators / the stories themselves here initially really seemed to be making the case like, no, this is actually where we're going with Krypton. But in fairness, in story, it's very much a question mark for Superman, for Lois, for Hamilton. I mean, the fact that this version of Krypton that they visit exists in the Phantom Zone in and of itself is a huge question mark. So there's a lot of ambiguity hanging over the proceedings. It's not like the characters themselves are necessarily like 100% sold on this. This is very much this exploratory mission here. So that then carries us to the main or the initial Return to Krypton storyline from the month of February 2001 that ran across all 4 super titles. So Superman by Loeb and McGuinness, as per usual. Adventures of Superman by Joe Casey and Duncan Rouleau. Man of Steel by Mark Schultz and Doug Mahnke, and Action 776 by Joe Kelly and Kano. So for the most part, our regular creators at this point in time. And we can jump around across issues here. We don't have to necessarily go in a linear fashion, but it does start off with Superman and Lois making their journey into the Phantom Zone, and they are attacked, and then they're saved by Mon-El.
Yeah.
What version?
Valor, sir.
Yeah,
Valor.
Because I was yes, that's true. But like that, because that is the version, like that tracked with the version who was floating around at the time. Yeah,
yeah.
Okay. But nice to see him make an appearance. It's very fitting.
No, and it really goes to where the creative teams were as fans of Superman too, because Loeb was very much Silver Age was his introduction to it. And I get the feeling that that was something that he has a lot of affection for. I know Joe Casey loved the craziness of the Silver Age. And we had messaged or commented back and forth on Facebook. Speaking of McGuinness, he and McGuinness did a Mr. Majestic series in the early 2000, in late 99 and 2000. That is just a love letter to Silver Age Superman. So, and Schultz, I just get the feeling that he was on board because it's Krypton to play with. So he gets to not only kind of deal with what he's been brought, he gets to go back and take more toys out of the toy box to play with. And Kelly just seems to. You said something in the Joker's Emperor Joker thing, and I never clocked it until you said it. God love Joe Kelly for constantly having to wrap these things up.
Right? I mean, that's
every single time.
Look, each creator has their part to play, and I don't know that any having to write the first or second or third like each one has its own challenges, but having to land the plane every time is a lot. I mean, that's a heavy lift. So yeah, I do have a lot of appreciation for him on that front. But
he has my most memorable line from this, or most memorable interaction, and that is at the end when Jor-El and Laura basically admit we know, and Laura says, "Just love him," and I'm just like, oh God, reach right into my heart and rip it out of my chest.
I know that is a beautiful moment as they're parting at the end of Return to Krypton, and Superman says something to the effect of, he's still not exactly sure what all of this means, but one thing he is sure of is how proud he is to be their son.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful moment. Yeah, that's the thing with Kelly. It could be very big and fun and action packed as it should be for Action Comics, but a lot of heartfelt standout moments as well. But this kickoff chapter, I love.
Yeah,
I love this scene with Lois and Clark before they meet the L's. Lois has some funny bit about what she's going to be called. She's like, I'm just Lois, not Lois or LL, my initials and whatnot. She wants a Kryptonian name, which is fun. But she clocks how Clark's a bit uncertain.
Yeah.
And she says, she's like, are you worried they're not going to like you? And he's like, no, I'm worried they are going to like me and I'm going to like them. And that's what's going to make all of this more difficult because he knows the fate that awaits them. So I like that internal conflict that he's dealing with and how she was able to clock that and just kind of at the outset of all of this before they meet Krypto.
Subtle, not so subtle, I guess you should say, references that Loeb makes at the beginning of the issue is in the 2-page spread as they're entering where you have the titles and the credits and everything. He makes this whole thing about Back to the Future and then steps back and go, but I always preferred the one where he was a werewolf. And I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. But there is a line on the first page where Lois says, it's all cream cheese. And I went, okay, I know writers have their ticks. And yes, this is a Hans Doofenshmirtz moment that if I had a nickel for every time I read or watched something with Jeph Loeb, that he had a character in something that it's going to be cream cheese, I've had 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but still weird. Because there's a lot. Have you ever seen Teen Wolf?
If I might have, really don't have any memory of it though.
So there's the basketball coach at one point looks at Michael J. Fox and he goes, there are 3 rules that I live by. Never get less than 12 hours sleep. Never play cards with a guy who has the same first name as a city. And never get involved with a woman with a tattoo of a dagger on her body. Now, if you stick to that, everything else is cream cheese.
There you go. Oh, he's consistent.
And I looked at that and I go, I didn't notice that back then. That is glaring and screaming at me off the page.
Nice. No, that's funny. I mean, on this note of Lois's narration, in that first chapter, she hits on this idea that I think is another core aspect of this, of how fascinating it must be for Clark, as it would be for anyone potentially, to see their parents young, to see them before they were parents, which is a wild thing. I was thinking about that myself. It's like, would that hold any appeal for me? I don't know. Maybe, I guess, I guess it would be kind of fascinating after all, right?
Yeah, I think about that because, I've only recently gotten to know my father as an adult, for various reasons. And I think about like how different he is now than he was 20 years ago to when I was a little kid. I can't imagine what he was like still in the army, working intelligence, dating my mother. Who was a nursing student. It's just like, it's like one of those things like, would I even like these people?
Yeah.
Is it like I love them because they're my parents, but that's one of the things about this particular chapter that I loved so much is that you did get to see Clark nervous about meeting them. And the only thing that took me out of it is that I had to queue up on my phone a Kryptonian translator, the little sheet, the little crib sheet. And I'm like, oh God, I always hate that. I don't want to have to do extra homework when I'm sitting in bed reading a comic.
What was the line? What did it translate to? Do you remember? It's okay if you don't. It's all right.
No, I have to pull up the thing. Because once you start noticing the characters, like if you can see an S in the word, you can let me get to it. I gotta just scroll.
While you pull it up, it's funny because I care passionately about all of this that we read and watch and talk about, and yet I've never been compelled to pull up a Kryptonian translator. I just always feel like, if I'm meant to know what they're saying, I'll know. And if not, it's okay. But one of the guys at my old comic shop, he taught himself the Kryptonian alphabet. So, he'd be right there with you.
I used to be a lot better at it, but it's like the first line is Jor, who is that outside I'm going to lose it at this point because I don't have it pulled up. I'm sorry. I should have written it down. If I was smart, I would have written it down.
Well, you made a big deal about how I translated it, so I think.
No, it was literally me sitting in bed with my tablet reading this issue and then getting my phone out and sitting there.
No, I admire the dedication. Yeah, but they have this meeting, and of course, Cal is the spitting image of Jor-El, and then he introduces himself as Cal and Lois, and they're there visiting, and actually, before they officially meet, the building starts to crumble. And so Superman has to spring into action. And so very early on, Cal reveals that he's from Earth. I mean, ultimately, we'll get more into kind of the central conflict that's going on the planet. But it's ironic that Cal is viewed as this outsider when he is actually Kryptonian. Of course, Lois isn't. But in any event, so that's how they initially encounter each other, and they have their meeting and all of that. And very early on in this, I suppose maybe we're midway through the first issue at this point, but still pretty early on, we get this great scene between Lara and Lois. And we find out Lara's, she's gone through the cosmonaut program, even though space travel is not allowed, but she's trained, and she and Jor-El have been talking about having kids. They decided to get a dog first. Have Lois and Cal thought about having kids? I love this. And Lois in her narration talks about how she's struck by the ease with which she's able to converse with Lara and what a contrast that is to the relationship with her own mother. And it made her feel a little sad. But I was saying, little moments like that, like that's something we can all relate to. And thinking about encounters with parents, in-laws, how the dynamics are different I loved it.
Yeah. And I loved that they stuck with her being a cosmonaut because, like, if you dig into the pre-crisis history, Laura was a badass. She really was. She was. Her role in it tends to get diminished depending on the version of it. I mean, Superman the movie, she's there just to basically ask questions and do very little else. But of course, when you're paying Brando several $1 million to stand there, I guess you're going to focus on him. But it's one of those things where, while reading that, I'm like, God, I'm so glad the post-crisis Superman happened. I'm glad the revamped happened, but look at everything they threw out to make that happen. And the things that now they're coming back to. And it almost made, when I was reading this issue, I'm like, I almost kind of wish they would have stuck with this, that this would have been the origin afterwards.
Well, that was one of the things that was going to be my final question for you.
Okay,
but
I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad. No, like I'm glad. Like I honestly, I don't disagree. I mean, I really feel like there was a lot of potential here that they kind of tossed aside for not any reason that it's clear to see.
But it was important. If Lois was going to come along, Lois has to play a part. And if Lois is going to play a part, how is she going to play a part? And, you know, she and Martha obviously get along. She and Jonathan get along. I mean, you look at like the post-death issues where they come to Metropolis to take care of her, basically, and pack up Clark's apartment. This is his birth mother. This is someone that he hasn't even met. Like, it should have been awkward, but it wasn't. Like, both of them feel very comfortable with these people. And I love the dynamic between Cal and Jor-El. And just the excitement in Jor-El's, like he's like, he did it. And he's all excited because Superman has solved the problem that they had, leading to a really good cliffhanger to the next issue. But just this whole, like, the first and last chapters of this are my favorite for different reasons. But this first chapter is so perfect in setting everything up and making you buy into it as a reader and being excited that they're on Krypton. And seeing Valor was cool because it's just like, oh yeah, he's supposed to be in the stasis zone.
Yeah. Well, we did talk about when we talked about all the Superboy issues that we did. That, you know, that popped up there. So, but yeah, the business with Lois and Lara was terrific. Cal and Jor-El. I mean, even before the big finish here, the fact that Cal believes him when Jor-El's talking about how the planet's teetering on the verge of destruction, and Cal's like, I know. He's like, you believe me? Like this poor guy who's just constantly dismissed to have somebody who other, and he even says, he's like, other than Lara, who's very supportive, but to actually hear some support from someone else clearly carried a lot. But then, yeah, we built to the big finish here where they're going to move the planet. They're going to move the planet back into its proper orbit. And now Lois is, of course, very shocked about this and the fact that he's not capable of this back on Earth, let alone now where the solar energy that he's absorbed will start to wane. This was interesting to me, I guess, on a couple of levels, because a lot of times when people talk about pre-crisis Superman and kind of how extreme it got at times, like, oh, he's juggling planets. And so it's kind of had like shades of that, but obviously they don't go that far here. There are these ion engines that Jor-El has developed, and Superman uses his heat vision to activate them. So it's not like he's single-handedly moving the planet, but he does move the planet. He saves the planet, but he expends all of his energy. And so that's our cliffhanger at the end of part 1 of him floating out there, seemingly in this lifeless state. In subsequent issues, he and Lois will ponder, well, what are the potential timeline ramifications of this? If this is actually the real Krypton in the past, and we have spared it from destruction, what does that mean for the present day? Did Kal-El ever arrive on Earth? Is there a Superman? Like, they don't, but he does not seem concerned about that in part 1. Did that track for you? Because I mean, he says to Lois, he's like, maybe this is why we're here. And the fact that he has the opportunity to save anyone, of course he would take it. But I don't know, at the same time, you might have expected a little bit more deliberation on the ramifications.
It depends on what you buy into as time travel in comics. In Marvel, it was, you can go back and change something, but you haven't changed your timeline. You've just created a new timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like they have just created a new timeline. When they go back, everything's going to be as it was. But in this new timeline, Krypton didn't blow up, potentially. Though I will say, kudos to Jeph Loeb for mixing the Silver Age and Superman the movie reasons for the destruction. Because in the Silver and Bronze Age, it's just like, well, pressures are just building up and it's going to blow up like a balloon. In the movie, the orbit is shifting us to the planet, and that's what's causing the planet to rip itself apart. I'm like, that's a pretty elegant way to marry those two concepts.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was kind of, and again, it goes back to Ed McGuinness. Ed McGuinness is the only one of this art team that could draw that scene and make it as awesome as it was.
Yeah, it was really striking.
Again, I'm not trying to insult anybody else, but my level of enjoyment of the story did dip slightly when it wasn't McGuinness anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about that, but at the same time, this is coming from the guy that didn't like Ed McGuinness at first. When he showed up during Y2K, I'm like, look, this is silly, this is cartoony. And then like 6 months later, I'm like, I will fight you in an alley with a rusty piece of metal over this man.
Yeah, I'm glad you came around. But yeah, I mean, look, and this has come up now a number of times as we're talking about all of these storylines. The Superman and action issues, in my view, and I think you share, and I think this has been pretty consistent among our guests too. I think we tend to find those the strongest, but the Man of Steel issues, I have to say, they've been a pleasant surprise going back to. I'm definitely finding more value there than I did before. And now, I have to say, now that we're into Joe Casey territory on Adventures of Superman, and it's more settled now, I'm finding more value there too. So, but still, yeah, those Superman and action issues in particular always stand out. I have to say, though, going into part 2 here, the Adventures of Superman issue, this is where everything we're talking about with Lara really pays off. She is the one who jumps in the rocket and goes and gets Superman, which is good. And I love there's also this talk about how the cone of the booster was meant for something else, i.e. the Matrix that we saw in that vision. But that's where they store Superman to bring him back. But I love Lois clocks this, and she's like, wow, you guys work fast. And they're a great team, Jor-El and Lara. But Jor-El is the one who's manning the controls and setting everything up. Lara is the one who is in that ship going out there. I love that.
Yep. Yeah, I loved this issue just in general, because this is where we get the tour of Krypton, essentially.
Yeah. Those firefalls. I love the firefalls. Those are it's striking.
And it's funny because around 1988, 89 was probably when I got it. I picked up from Walden Books the first Superman source book from the Mayfair games. And that had this extensive section on Krypton. And that's where I first really learned about the pre-crisis Krypton. And seeing all the stuff just play out here, I'm like, God, they threw away so many cool things. Just everything about it, like going to the firefalls, and like men have to go here and be out and assert their alpha dominance by overcoming this, and Lois kind of gives them the business on that, and just everything about this issue just made me smile. It really did. I was just really happy with it.
There's also a very fun, suggestive moment between Lois and Clark where she remarks about how he's powerless under this red sun and it's her turn to wear him out for a change. Hey-o. No, this is no, go ahead.
But that's the thing, is that they were thinking of getting rid of the marriage, and this just proves when you have people that are committed to it, the marriage works and creates great moments between them.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. But yeah, it's a fun, crucial issue here. Like we said, we get to see Lara in action. Like you said, we get this tour as Lois and Clark are exploring. So we get to see different sites on Krypton, which is a ton of fun. But we also get a much clearer sense now. What comes into focus is the central conflict at play on Krypton at the moment, where you have this xenophobic, isolationist faction led by General Zod. They prohibit space flight, and they are obsessed with the purity of Krypton. And so this causes major problems for the House of El because they have now engaged in unauthorized space flight, which is registered by Zod and the Council. And they also learn that Jor-El is harboring these aliens from another world, which creates this conflict. And at the climax of part 2, Zod sends the Eradicator robots to attack the Els. But yeah, I mean, this is really the central conflict here between this isolationist, xenophobic position and Jor-El and his expansionist movement. They want to look to the stars. They want to explore. I mean, not to short circuit, but when we get to the second version of the story, Return to Krypton 2, it's the the type of conflict has shifted, but it's still kind of this, just a kind of a different version of an ideological struggle on the planet. But that's our setup here for the first Return to Krypton. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself, or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more.
Yeah, and I'm glad that none of what Zod was saying has any resonance to contemporary life.
You know, I got to tell you,
at all.
It's funny because obviously I knew when we talked about President Lex, there's certain parallels that they're right there. But revisiting Action 775 in our last episode, and then seeing this here, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Yet another instance where this was, it sadly remains very timely.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into it too deeper than that, but I gotta say, for a 25-year-old story, it had a very now feeling.
Yeah,
in a way that I didn't like. Not that I didn't like the story, I just didn't like the way it made me feel. So, but no, I love that they came up with a real story within this big idea. Like, they could have coasted on the idea that, Krypton, the origin was changing and that Krypton still existed and all that. But no, they sat down and they broke down a really great inciting incident, and you get to see Jor-El and Cal and Lara and Lois all fighting together. And at one point, Lois is knocked down, and Lara's got to be like, "Take deep breaths. You're merely stunned." I'm just like, I love Lara. like, I love this Lara. I want more of this Lara.
Yeah. Well, it's, when we get to Return to Krypton 2, it's like, you understand why you would want to pair Cal and Jor up. But part of me is like, man, it would have been interesting if they had flipped it and he had been fighting side by side Lara for that second storyline here. But I agree wholeheartedly, right? Like you said, they could have just coasted, but they really put some meat on the bone here. And it's funny, we talk about how we're getting the quote, the Silver Age version of Krypton, but we're also getting the quote unquote real Zod here too. That's the other thing. It wasn't just that version of Krypton that went away, but the versions of Zod. And what's funny too is that we're right at the point in time here where they're starting to introduce the Zod of Pakistan. And so right around the same time here, we're getting a much more classic depiction of the character. And it's funny. I think where I've kind of landed on Zod, I like the version of a General Zod who agrees with Jor-El about the impending doom of the planet, but they differ on how to go about saving the planet. I do kind of like that. That's not the track that they take here necessarily, but the core idea of Zod preserving Krypton, right? Like that manifests in different ways, but the way it manifests here, as ugly as it is, I mean, it still tracks with, I think, what you would expect from a version of General Zod. So, this felt like a, believable conflict.
Yeah, and it's not to take away from anything that Terrence Stamp did, because, that's an iconic version of the character. But what I will say is that the Zod that exists in the Christopher Reeve universe is not a very complex character.
No, he just wants to rule.
And
revenge.
And now we're cooking, huh? So I think, and that works in the context of like a film, especially of that time period. But one of the things I kind of liked about Man of Steel was that there was a lot of meat on the bone with that General Zod.
Yeah. Yeah, you got where he was, not that, agree, right? But you totally get where he's coming from.
And so here, I love this idea that he's just in front of this, like, how many people are on the Science Council? He's in a stadium.
Well, I think he says, I convene the entire, so I guess normally they just have a small contingent, but this time we're running everybody. Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, this is we're tripping into like episode 1 Phantom Menace levels of a Senate where it's all these people. And again, we have a really good cliffhanger, really good ending, a hook to get you to want to come back. And one of my favorite moments is Jor-El going, "Are you finished?" And that one shot of Superman, he goes, "I am now."
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, this is cool. And again, like if you read the original Return to Krypton from the 60s, it's one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. But that conceit that he's human from the beginning, I like the idea that he had his powers and now he doesn't, and we've been eased into that instead of it being a light switch as soon as he steps foot on the planet.
Yeah. No, I mean, if he really is a battery, it wouldn't be instantaneously depleted. So this tracked. And then this allows you to have the moment of him pushing the planet and needing to be rescued. Mm-hmm. No, so yeah, and that initial rescue of Jor-El and Lara. No, I like the way that played. It definitely made sense. But yeah, to your point about the size of everybody convened before Zod. Yeah, I mean, you really get the sense that this isolationist position is one seemingly shared by the majority, and that Jor-El and his expansionist movement are more of a subset, right? Are more of this kind of underground movement.
But what it does more than anything to me in both the pre-crisis version and this version is it makes you realize why they didn't save themselves.
Yeah.
And why it was only Cal and Argo and then everybody else that was trapped in the Phantom Zone. But still, regardless of that, I think one of the key components of the Superman story is that it's a cautionary tale on the part of Krypton, in that Krypton did not listen, and therefore everyone died because of that, because they couldn't see past their own arrogance. And here, and there was something that was touched on, like the idea of space travel being outlawed in the pre-crisis universe was because, what's his name? God, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Destroyed the moon leg Thor.
Yeah.
Jaxor. So that's
Jaxor, right?
Jaxor. Yes, that's right. How could I forget it when there was such controversy during the Krypton series? But so that was a very Silver and Bronze Age idea of, okay, we've outlawed it because of the destruction that it caused. It would basically be like us outlawing space travel after the Challenger accident in 1986. So, but adding this kind of xenophobia, this isolationist aspect of it, just makes it a more compelling version of the story.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it sets up such a much better battle. It's not like just there's aliens on the planet, we have to go destroy them. No, Jor-El has finally crossed a line, and we have to take him out too.
Yeah, well, it becomes an ideological dispute between them. And I agree. I think that does make it a lot more compelling. And yeah, it's one of those things, in some way, shape, or form, you have to account for why Krypton, for such an advanced society, didn't have the means to save themselves. And yes, what we get in that earlier version with the business about the moon being destroyed, at least it's something, it's an explanation. But yeah, to make it something much, much deeper, much more ideological, I think it just gives you more places to go with it. So yeah, I like this a lot. And then we get to part 3, the Man of Steel issue. So during that battle with the Eradicator robots, the belts that Lois and Clark wore there, which contained the ore that the Superman had given to John Henry Irons, that was their way home. And so that gets destroyed. So their mission in part 3, the Man of Steel issue, is to track down more of this ore or its equivalent on Krypton so that they will be able to return home. And while they're doing this, Jor-El goes off to his Arctic lair, which we'll get to in the conclusion of this. But Lois and Clark disguise themselves as Nightwing and Flamebird. And they go to what was Kandor to search for this ore. And then they are confronted by the Hounds of Zod, Cruel and Feor.
Are you telling me, sir, that you do not like the name Cruel?
Well, as I was reading it, I was like, whatever. But then as I started thinking about talking about it, I was like, oh, God.
Yeah. It's one of those things where these are things that people will point to as like, well, thank God they got rid of all that. I just, in my Superman career, my fan career right now, I just find it all so charming. I'm like, of course it's Cruel. And of course he looks just like Jor-El, except now he has like a porn stash. And seeing Feora, I was just like, oh, that's cool. It's there's different things. They went deep. They went deep into the bench for this one. And I love that this works as a scene, but looking at their designs, and especially Feora's head style, I'm like, oh my God, is this early 2000s? This is what we would have seen in the J.J. Abrams movie.
Fair, yeah.
I'm willing to bet we would have seen a woman with that hairstyle.
Gotcha.
As one of the Kryptonian villains.
My favorite part about this issue, I mean, we talked about some fun stuff, but my favorite part about this is we get this explanation about what this version of Kandor was. Because at this point in time, we talk about pre-crisis elements that have been stripped away, the quote-unquote true versions of Krypton and Zod and Kandor. But as you know better than anybody, my friend, we've had this other version of Kandor in the Triangle era books for a while. And it was one that was collected by the demon Tolos. And it was comprised not of millions or hundreds of thousands of Kryptonians, but rather representatives of all these different alien races. And then Tolos could possess any of them at will and wreak havoc and whatnot. But what was so interesting here, as we are now in this quote-unquote Silver Age version of Krypton in the Phantom Zone, and we're in the crater where Kandor used to be, there are a few stragglers around there, these alien beings. And they talk about how Kandor became this ghetto, essentially, where all of the aliens on the planet were rounded up. And then there was some sort of, I think they call it transdimensional abduction. And they don't talk about exactly what happened. But I'm reading this and I'm saying to myself, credit to these guys, and especially to Mark Schultz, because this is a way to not, to again, somewhat, I think, reconcile the Kryptonian version of Kandor with the version of Kandor that we've had in the Triangle era books. I mean, I didn't go back and look up those first issues with Tolos. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was established he was going around to other planets. It wasn't that he collected them from one place where they had been rounded up. But I guess I just like the fact that it's like, oh, maybe you have to do some mental gymnastics here, but you can still kind of square it with the version that we've had. So I like that.
Yeah, and that's something that I did not appreciate at the time, but I appreciate now, is they did at least try to do the legwork to make both work. It could have been very easy for them, as I said, to just say, nope, none of that happened. This is it. You're going to accept it. Take what we want, take what we're giving you, and just and like it. Whereas here, at least, they're playing some gymnastics to get to that point. I'm not saying ultimately they would have worked if they stuck with this, but at least there was an attempt to make it work.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
In this storyline.
Yeah, like, does it line up completely? No, but can you look at it and say, I mean, if putting aside the business that is, we're in the Phantom Zone, but it's like, if this is actually a representation of what Krypton actually was, yeah, maybe that's what Tolos abducted. Maybe the story he told about going around to other worlds wasn't true. Again, it doesn't totally line up, but at least they're not totally inconsistent either.
Or maybe he heard this name Kandor, that's what he called his city, and that there is an actual city of Kandor with a version of Brainiac out there. I mean, both can, one does not negate the other automatically.
Yeah.
You can make these leaps, and you can justify it in the ways that you're doing it. And like I said, reading this chapter made me, you don't know how badly I just want to dig everything out and reread this entire era, and that I don't have time for that right now.
Yeah, no, nobody understands more than I do. I totally get that. But yeah,
I mean, I'm about to reread What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, the American Way, because I'm going to be covering Superman versus the Elite. So I'm going back to that but I was just like, man, did I not appreciate Mark Schultz as much as I should have? And is he one of the forgotten Superman creators of this era?
Yes, I think, and I include myself in this, I think we all kind of slept on Mark Schultz a little bit because Loeb and Kelly, I mean, my God, we call it the Loeb Kelly era. They got the lion's share of the attention. I think pretty clear they were the primary drivers. They were telling the beginnings and the ends of these stories. They were the new creators, whereas Schultz had been there for a little while. But Mark Schultz, credit to Doug Mahnke too, who's there for a significant portion of the Schultz run. But I mean, Schultz was a very steady hand, and especially when you view Man of Steel in comparison to Adventures of Superman, which for a while was all over the place. So you had a very steady hand and vision. And like I said in our first episode, is the sci-fi vibe my absolute favorite? No, it's probably not. I like the more human take that we get with the Superman title. But do I think that if you have 4 titles, one of them should be kind of Krypton, Eradicator, sci-fi focus? Yeah, man, like you should. And a lot of these hold up particularly well.
Yeah, and he's also like Loeb and like Kelly. He's stuck with the initial premise of what his book was supposed to be.
Yes.
Whereas Adventures of Comics was like, a slot machine.
Yeah, they did one episode, one issue that was like Man on the Street, and then they're like, I don't know. Uh, but no, with this business with Kandor, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like we're saying, it would have been super easy to have a version of Kandor, whether it was there or had already been abducted, and have it be just a city populated by Kryptonians. But they did something that tracked with the version of Kandor that we had, and that also thematically tied into this central conflict on the planet of Krypton at this point in time, where all of these aliens were rounded up and shoved into this one place. So,
and it was a legitimate way for them to get the ore, which,
yes.
is kind of the MacGuffin of the issue. But this feels very Doctor Who to me in a lot of ways as well. Like you're seeing this shining city, but then underneath there's this underbelly of ugliness. And I really liked Superman headbutts Cruel, like full on Glasgow kiss. Like you think that, he's the one that's been trained by Zod. He's the highly trained killing machine. And Superman's like, nah, brah, this ain't going down.
Yeah.
Love it. Loved it.
It's great. Now, if memory serves, I think they're ultimately driven away from the Kandor crater, but they make their way to Meteor Valley.
Yes.
And they're able to obtain the ore there. They get an assist by the Zan, who, refresh my memory, they're these godlike beings who possess Lois and help her overcome Feora.
This is the point where we do have like legitimate Deus Ex Machina going on.
Yeah.
To kind of get us out of it. But they had generated enough goodwill in the story itself that I totally just walked into it, went, okay, yeah, this tracks. This is okay. I'm good with this.
Yeah. And then we're propelled into the conclusion of the first Return to Krypton storyline, where we have the final showdown between the L's and their expansionist movement, although most of those members don't really seem to make it too long, versus Zod and his forces. And it's at essentially Jor-El's Arctic fortress hideout, complete with giant keys outside. And of course,
loved it.
Lois asks, what's with the giant key? And Clark goes, giant keyhole? And she's like, what, you lose your powers and all of a sudden you develop a sense of humor or something to that extent? But what I was saying at the beginning of this, where this run overall, there are some, I think, interesting infusions of pre-crisis elements, and the giant key is one of them, but always with, I think, a fun new twist on it. So what you ultimately find out is that those keys are part of this defense array, and then they create some sort of force field or blast or something like that, but they're weapons in disguise, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, this one opens with action, which is appropriate given the title. But it just occurs to me that more and more as you go through the post-crisis era, it's I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but it seems like, go back to when Jurgens and them introduced the new Fortress of Solitude. Like, they made that concept work within the new parameters of this world and made it something that you love. And even with the way Mark Schultz reconfigured it as, like, it's a Terra sect. It's bigger on the inside. So, again, Doctor Who. And so having the giant key there, you're dead on. It looks silly, but they give us some justification that it's not just there as a Smallville level, like, hey, look, a reference.
How dare you?
How dare I? Are you going to argue the point?
No, I can't.
If you want to, we can.
No, I can't.
I say it with love. I really like this final chapter, though. It does everything that it needs to do. It delivers a satisfying, action-packed ending, but with an emotional core that makes you feel something for everybody involved with it, and you feel a sense of loss when they have to leave.
You do, right? In the moment where Jor-El calls out to Kal-El, right? And it becomes clear that, oh, he has known all along. He sensed who Kal really is. And in this confrontation with Zod, where Superman is finally like, I'm not an outsider. Krypton is my home. This is where I'm from.
Yep.
And like you said, I think probably the most resonant moments, that final exchange with Lara and Lois about love him, and that final embrace with Clark and his parents, biological parents, where he says how proud he is to be their son. Yeah, I mean, it was very satisfying. I enjoyed it as well. And bittersweet when they have to leave, but they don't go back alone because Krypto at the last second runs through the portal. And that now gives us, because once again, as you know as well as anybody, we've had a version of Krypto, but just a normal Earth canine who's been at play and had been living with Superboy in Hawaii and then made his way to Cadmus and then I think ultimately just disappeared. But so we had a Krypto for a while, but this is a superpowered Krypto who comes through that portal and will be a fixture for a while after this. But yeah, I mean, it's satisfying. I mean, it still doesn't answer the question definitively for us, the readers, or for the characters about what that really was, whether it was real or not. And I think that's even part of the final exchange between Jor-El and Kal, right? Where I think Jor-El says, like, was this real?
Yeah, circling back to that moment of I am Kal-El of Krypton. Krypton is my home too. I am Kal-El of the House of El, and I have come home. It's just like, I did not have the fist pumping moment back in 2001 when I first read this that I had reading it now. I'm like, God, I'm so glad I'm revisiting this because now I get what they were going for. And Zod is just like, I am Krypton and my blood would never spawn on an abomination such as you. Just like Kelly's ramping it up right here at the end to make for such a satisfying ending. And I love, to a certain extent, how the way they leave it ambiguous. Because Kal-El, perfect, isn't it? A perfect dream, a perfect world. And I'm like, okay, that's cute. And so what it makes me think is that they were on the fence whether this was going to be real or not. Like, they said that they didn't do it as this is definitely happening. They left themselves some wiggle room, and much like the evil guy in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they chose poorly, I think, in retrospect.
Yeah. You know what? I think there is an argument to what you said that they wanted to give themselves, some room to maneuver there. I guess maybe what kind of breaks my heart is that, like we're saying, had they fully committed to this and had DC allowed this to stand, and by the way, I'm still not exactly sure what went on. I don't know if this was ultimately DC saying no or the creators changed their mind. Like, I don't know, but my gut is probably DC said no. But I think we're both circling on this idea that, yeah, we kind of wish this had been able to stand. But now I'm saying to myself, I could have been okay with it remaining ambiguous, right? Because you get to Return to Krypton 2, and we are told, no, this was all a plot by Brainiac 13. But if we had stayed in that ambiguous land for ever or for longer, I probably would have been okay with that. That would have been an okay compromise for me.
So one of the main reasons that I would love a new collection of this, though, is I want versions of these covers to these 4 issues without all the copy and stuff on it.
Yeah.
Because that's something that stood out this time too, how much I loved the covers to this particular story. And how they don't really match the art on the inside, but they're just beautiful on their own.
Yeah, I mean, they look like old sci-fi movie covers, right? Or movie posters. And they're all done by, help me out on the name, Paul Ricochet?
Yeah, that's about as close as I got to it as well.
But yeah, that would be cool. Again, we've been mentioning these trades. I mean, we've talked in various episodes about the newer collections, the City of Tomorrow, Volume 1 and 2, the forthcoming compendium that recollects Volume 1 and 2. We've talked about the Emperor Joker Deluxe Edition. We've talked about the President Luthor, the newer trade. We've talked about the forthcoming Our Worlds at War omnibus. But what a number of us who have been participating in these discussions have are the old white cover trades that DC put out in the early 2000s. It's a 6-volume set, and they're not perfect collections. They do leave a fair amount out, but for the time when it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get any collections or complete collections, there's something, and they're pretty, I think, pretty striking trade dress. They really do stand out on the shelf. I'm looking at them now. So even though I have upgraded or will upgrade to newer collections as they come out, I will continue to keep these because I do have a soft spot for them.
The reason why I keep them is they're artifacts. They're you look at them and yeah, you could just read the stories, but to me, it's just like, what was the thinking that went into it? This is what the people who put together trade paperbacks at the time thought would sell better to an audience that wasn't reading the titles as they were coming. So I think, the more you get more complete versions of it, I think the more you see kind of the cracks in the I guess we should call it the shield system. Because it wasn't the triangle system anymore.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
So, but with stories like this, you can definitely just put everything in there. Just do it as complete as humanly possible. And if you were just going to do Return of Krypton, for the love of God, put the crypto issues between the two in there, because that just continues that storyline.
Absolutely. Well, which brings us to our next point here. But I agree completely about the trades and the opportunity for improvement in newer editions. I'll always keep these, I think artifact is a perfect word. The other thing is, like I said, at the time in the early 2000s, it wasn't like, oh yeah, everything's going to be collected.
Yeah.
Where now it's a very easy expectation
Absolutely.
that we have. So I remember at the time, I guess, I don't know that I even would have articulated it like this, but I think it conjured the feeling that, oh, this is something special. This is a big deal. DC's behind it. I mean, to put out a 6-volume series. And then they also did collect Our Worlds at War as well. So it was more than they could have done. So I guess I appreciate it for what it was. The very last thing about the first Return to Krypton, there's a great splash page. Shout out to, I feel like Kano is another one who's kind of like a little bit of an unsung hero in this. I really do enjoy his stuff, but there's a great splash page in the midst of battle, and it's a big, busy page. And you have Zod shouting "For Krypton," and then you have Cal and Jor, and I forget which one of them says it. I think it's Clark who says "For Krypton," and it's not shouted, right? It's much more subdued, but no less meaningful or impactful. So I really like that moment a lot. But then coming out of this, there were a couple of crypto-centric issues that I just wanted to highlight here. One of them is Man of Steel 112 by Mark Schultz. Doug Mahnke had the month off, I guess, so we had Yannick Paquette and Koipel on the art duties. And then we also have Superman 170 by Jeph Loeb and guest artist Dale Keown. The Man of Steel issue pits Superman and Krypto against Mr. Bloat and Shrewface, these two dim-witted metahumans who are busted out of Stryker's Island by their shady lawyer. He needs them to pull a heist. And Krypto is able to track down the scent of them, and Superman's able to intervene. I don't know that I got a ton of mileage out of this Man of Steel issue, but it was nice to see Krypto get some play. I welcome any thoughts you have.
Yeah, no, I pretty much felt the same way with that. I had much more of a hardcore feeling about the Superman issue than this one. This one was just like, oh nice, look, it's Krypto and Superman in an adventure together. That's kind of cool. And yeah, the villains, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed. They're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. But that's kind of what you want as kind of an entryway. Like, you don't want Krypto going up against Lex Luthor, like, the first day out, basically.
Yeah, and this continues the thread. We saw this in an issue of Superman that we already talked about, the crossover with Detective Comics where they get back the Kryptonite ring. But in that Superman issue, right after Return to Krypton, already Krypto is tearing up Lois's kitchen. Yeah. We see that continue here. he's doing a number on the apartment. And then Superman takes him out for some exercise, and they encounter Jimmy Olsen, so they have their first meeting. Yeah. Oh, and then this does end. I guess this is set up for stories to come, but we do have John Henry Irons arrested by the DEO for his involvement with the Citizens Army for the Economic Liberation of Suicide Slum.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have that little development here, but yeah, I mean, it's a fun little crypto centric story. But I agree with you. The Superman 170, which features the return of Mongol II and the introduction of his sister Mongal, who show up in Metropolis looking to kill Superman, just as Lois, Clark, and Krypto are out for a walk in Centennial Park, and of course have to spring into action. And I guess for me, the two most significant factors here. One, in lieu of the typical narrator or narration device that Loeb uses here, in its place, we have a comic strip, essentially, or a cartoon strip written by Clark Kent and drawn by Kyle Rayner that tells the story of Krypto. And that plays out as this battle unfolds. And it culminates in Krypto biting Mongol in the neck and nearly killing him, which prompts Superman to bring Krypto to the fortress to stay there to live with Ned, the super robot, because it's too dangerous to have him in Metropolis. So, we're not dog owners, but we spend a lot of time with my mother-in-law's dog. So I feel like I've become a dog owner adjacent, and this was so heartbreaking.
So I was talking to my wife like 2 days ago about this issue. Because we were talking about David Corenswet's recent comments that, Superman doesn't need Krypto, but Krypto needs Superman, to which I actually was sitting there looking at my phone going, the hell you say? Because I am a dog owner. And I told my wife that. She goes, yeah, F him. I'm like, I don't know if I go that far. She goes, no, F him, because Krypto is a good boy. I go, well, in the comics, he had to put him in the fortress because he went for Mongol's throat. Yeah, he's a good boy. And I'm like, no, he went for his throat. She goes, yes, he's a good boy. I'm like, okay, so I see where this conversation is going.
I think I'm kind of with it. I mean, Mongol lives. He survives. Poor Krypto.
But this was a heartbreaking issue. I could never fathom having to rehome any of my dogs. It would literally, like when we lost Boo back in 2018, which was the dog we got in 2002, I was planning like this giant podcasting thing. I've never done it because it was all coming together when she died, and it's all tied to those emotions. And when we lost Mayday back in 2022, and that was very sudden. Mayday and Gracie, they were sisters. They kind of glommed onto me more than my wife. Boo was my wife, loved me, but preferred my wife. These two preferred me. So, like I could never, I'm getting emotional about it right now, even thinking about it. I almost cried at the end of this. And it's because of the children's book aspect of it, I think, makes it even more heartbreaking.
Yeah, I know. I call it a comic strip, but yeah, I think children's book is a more apt description, right? And it's this notion of how Krypto is like a regular dog, and he likes eating bones and barks and all that stuff, but he's not just a regular dog. He's Superman's dog, and he can fly and he has heat vision, but also he's still a dog, right? And and as this unfolds, it builds to that tragic outcome. I think the one thing, well, I guess they try to soften it when Superman is giving the instructions to the robot. He's like, occasionally release my pheromone because Krypto likes it. So trying to make it as much like home as possible, but it's still a tough pill to swallow. I think the main thing that softens it for me is just knowing that not too long from now, Superman will give Krypto to Connor at the beginning of the Teen Titans series, and he'll live with him on the farm. So it's like, okay, this isn't forever, but it's, like I said, it's still a tough pill to swallow. And I think what adds to the tragedy and the resonance of this is that Lois, the one who has not been a happy camper about having Krypto around, she tries to make the case for Krypto. She tells Clark, he was just protecting me. So this was an effective one. And the month before Our Worlds at War kicks off.
Yeah, just God, even rereading it, it was very emotional. Um, Liked the Dale Keown artwork too. It
Yeah, it
was
was nice.
I'm a big Dale Keown Hulk fan, so seeing him draw my favorite DC character, was kind of cool. But yeah, it was and I do like Lois at the end. It's like, what does the federal government want with Mongol?
Yeah. I didn't ask you to read this, but I did read through Man of Steel 114 as well, also in May 2001. And I just mention it because in that issue, the Eradicator returns from deep space crazed. He's talking about the end times and the creator and destroyer is coming and you have to repent and all of that. Like he's really seemingly gone off the deep end. And the way that Superman is ultimately able to subdue him, he enters the Kryptonian theta state and is able to share an image of this Phantom Zone version of Krypton with the Eradicator. And it creates such a dissonance, the conflicting versions of Krypton, that the Eradicator like literally falls apart, because this is at the point in time where he looks like a Megazord from Power Rangers, because his physical form is comprised of the remains of the prior version of the Fortress.
Mm-hmm.
And so this version of the Eradicator, it's insane because physically he's got, the remains of the Fortress. Internally, there's the original kind of prime Eradicator program. There's the subsequent Eradicator program. There's the soul of David Connor. And now the Eradicator is bombarded with these images of a conflicting Krypton. And so that quote unquote Megazord body falls apart. And Superman gathers it up, I think with Pat Dugan, Stripesy, gathers up the remnants of the physical form and the humanoid Eradicator being, and they literally put him on ice in these tanks at the steelworks for the time being. But I just mention it because it is, and Superman questions this when Eradicator reappears of like, okay, how does this all fit? Right? If the version of Krypton that I knew that gave rise to the Eradicator was a false program, he's still trying to sort all of this out. So that was another issue that, not a crypto issue, but in terms of dealing with the fallout of Return to Krypton.
Yes.
Over a year later. Oh, no, go ahead.
Literally no memory of that issue.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a cool cover of that giant Eradicator, like coming right towards the reader. And again, just the warnings of doom that alluding to Imperiex and our worlds at war and whatnot. So that's May 2001. And then over a year later, in September 2002, we get Return to Krypton 2. Now, you and I were joking about this off mic, and you read the trade paperback. They don't even give you a recap page, not even a paragraph in between. It's just you turn the page, it says Return to Krypton 2. There you go.
Why does Superman have black on his S? It doesn't matter.
I mean, like one page of text would have gone along. I mean, look, for us, it's fine. We know what's going on, but yeah, I don't know. And by the way, the reason I had to dig this trade out, parts 1, 2, and 3 of Return to Krypton 2 are completely MIA on the app. They are not available.
Nope.
The Action Comics issue is. So this was the one instance where I really had to dig them out. But once again, a 4-part story that runs across all the titles. We've had some changes now, creative teams. So Jeph Johns is stepping in and doing the Superman issue. I mean, this is Superman 184. This is the issue after Loeb left.
Mm-hmm.
This final one, Loeb and McGuinness wrapped up their run with 183. This is 184. Jeph Johns writes it. Jeff Loeb is credited as the idea man and the inspiration. And we have Pasquale Ferry on art. Adventures of Superman, still, once again, Joe Casey and Duncan Rouleau. On Man of Steel, once again, Mark Schultz, but this time Carl Kerschel on the art. And then in the Action Comics issue, Joe Kelly and Pasquale Ferry. So he draws the first and last issue in this. For this one, we can continue to go issue by issue if you want, or we can kind of take it more as a unit. I think that might serve us a little bit better.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was kind of hoping we would do that, because the only thing I wanted to mention on an issue by issue basis was something that happened during the first chapter. Just to tell you, 2002, Michael was very excited at the idea of Jeph Johns writing Superman, because JSA and Flash were two of my favorite titles.
Sure.
So I was really excited. But there's a scene at the beginning where Clark is explaining to Jor-El what heat vision is. Heat vision, you just expelled a concentration of solar energy like a waste product. And I'm like, Okay, I see where you're going with that, Jeph Johns. You'll eventually do that in the New 52, but oh, you were thinking about that all the way back in 2002. Interesting.
Listen, we know this guy plays a long game, right? We know that letter he
Yeah,
wrote to the Superboy comic about how Lex Luthor should be the human
his
DNA
villain
donor.
origin story.
Yeah, so another example of that. But the premise of Return to Krypton 2, and I mean, like a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in the Loeb Kelly era, I mean, I don't know how well known, well remembered, or discussed the first Return to Krypton story is generally. I feel like Return to Krypton 2 is very overlooked and under the radar. Overall, I did find it to be a solid enough story, though not nearly as compelling as the first one was. But essentially, Jor-El shows up on Earth at the Kent farm. You were mentioning earlier how, yeah, Ma is not even in this one. She's already in town at the general store that Jonathan and Martha now run. She has a lot of pies to bake, but she has Pa stay behind. I guess Clark is sleeping over. And he's tasked with making Clark breakfast. And he says, I made your favorite, cold cereal and milk. But anyway, Jor-El shows up now on Earth, charges up under the sun. Nice moment between Jonathan and Jor-El, where Jor-El thanks Jonathan for doing what Jor-El could not. I thought that was a resonant scene. But the premise here is that Krypton is engulfed in this civil war. After the events of the last story, Jor-El was elected president and really pushed for scientific advancement and progress. But they were opposed by this faction of religious zealots, the Order of Rouleau, who oppose scientific progress. So it's a battle now. It's not expansion versus isolation. Now it's science and fact versus faith. And the hypocrisy of this group is pretty wild, because one of the things that I guess they take most umbrage at is Jor-El's cloning technology, yet they steal that cloning technology and use it to build their army of soldiers. And they use the genetic material of Jor-El and Lara's unborn child. That was one bit we didn't mention at the end of the first Return to Krypton, that Lara is pregnant. And the reason why they use that genetic material is they believe in this prophecy that a member of the House of El will be the chosen one, something to that effect. And that person will be able to enter the so-called heart of Krypton, this god machine that has been there from the beginning and controls the planet and become one with the sun god Ra, or something to that effect. So that's the essential setup here. And most of it is Cal and Jor running around and trying to reunite with their team and recover the cloning technology. This time they align reluctantly, but with the Hounds of Zod, Cruel and Feora, who's gone undercover with the Order of Rouleau. It's interesting because their whole bit is they want the deal that Jor-El has made is he'll use his cloning technology to bring Zod back, because Zod met his end at the end of the first Return to Krypton storyline in that battle. So this conflict has made for some strange bedfellows, and that's our main setup. And I guess the quote unquote twist of this is at the end of part 3, I believe. That's when Superman sees this heart of Krypton god machine. And what strikes him is that he sees the familiar Eradicator Matrix, but he also sees the Brainiac 13 technology. And that's when it starts to dawn on him, oh, this is a trap. This was meant for me. That's what this is all about. I welcome any thoughts you have.
It was really disappointing, I think, was my overwhelming thought. I loved the first one so much. Rereading it, I'm like, well, maybe I'll get to that second one and I'll find that thing, that spark, that zing, to quote, the Adam Sandler Dracula. Maybe. And I really liked the first issue, but I think that goes to the fact that I'm a mark for Jeph Johns just in general. And you're right, the scene with Jor-El and Jonathan and him doing things with his father. And then you get to Krypton, and it's just like all the joy that the first story had is completely absent.
Yeah, it's ravaged by war. I mean, it's largely in ruins.
And that should be like, oh, okay, so we're going to come out on the other side of this, and it's going to be a satisfying ending. And even the team up with, I liked the banter between Jor-El, Cruel, and Superman. I thought that was great. I was like, okay, this is a good little bit of character moment that none of these people like each other, but they're all going to work together. But when it came out like this was a giant trap for from Brainiac 13. I'm like, didn't we just go through this whole storyline with Brainiac 13 coming back? And didn't we get rid of that?
Yeah, because
And
this is
now,
post. I mean, just for context
yeah,
for people, I mean, this is post Our Worlds at War, which
yeah,
we'll be talking about in our next episode. But yeah,
yes, not to not to spoil
that's
anything from a
okay.
24-year-old story. But no, it's just the problem is the way they put the genie back in the bottle wasn't satisfying. And there's no way that I could sit here and go, well, maybe, because it doesn't work. If they had just never talked about it again, I think that would have been more satisfying than being told that no, it wasn't real in the first place. Because that takes like a lot of the emotional beats from the first story and just nullifies them. Though I did get the sense reading this feels a lot like what we would have seen in the J.J. Abrams Superman film
Oh,
when he went back to Krypton. This is what we would have seen.
I hear you.
The Chosen One, the heart of all of that would have, I swear to God, all of that would have been in there.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's like it's not. It's not a bad read, and it's only 4
No.
issues. You get through it quickly enough. I think. Look, the first Return to Krypton storyline, obviously it had something to accomplish in terms of at least introducing or teasing this notion that the Krypton we thought we knew is not the real Krypton. But within that, you still had, I think, some very compelling themes and an interesting storyline and a believable conflict between the different factions on Krypton. Here, I don't know that it really has that much new to say. And if anything, it takes a lot away. Like we said, you don't have Lois, so it feels more, like that's the funny thing with the first Return to Krypton. We're not on Earth except for the very beginning and the very end. We don't have any of the rest of our regular supporting cast, but Lois is there throughout. And I feel like it creates more of a sense of familiarity, and it feels more like the world that we're in, but she's absent here. I really think sidelining Lara for the whole thing was a misstep, because I think that really took something away. I feel like they were teasing the idea that something was off with Jor-El in terms of some of his behavior. I mean, there wasn't anything that was like so egregious, but I think just in terms of maybe some of his tactics, aligning with Cruel, I don't know, at one point where doesn't the building come down on some of the zealots who are following them, and he doesn't seem all that concerned, and it seems like maybe Clark has some sort of reaction to that. And Clark does, I think, via his narration at one point talk about how Jor-El seems desperate, but he would be desperate too if he were trying to save Lois. So they do address it, but I don't know. It seems like maybe as I was rereading it, and I had like very little memory of it, I was thinking like, are we going down the path of maybe something's off with Jor-El? He wasn't good, something like that. I don't know, where there's been some turn, but we don't go down that road. And then we've already had an ideological clash on Krypton in the first storyline. So here we're just flipping out what the sides are, but it still kind of felt like very familiar territory. And ultimately, it just felt like this was a means to an end to get to the point of, oh, no, this wasn't real. Like, that was just the sense that I had reading it.
And it's one of those things where the ending retroactively makes the first 3 chapters you read not as good.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. Like you can, you're absolutely right that it's not a complete waste of time to read. And it is interesting. And there's that whole, I'm a big, just in my own general life, I have very strong opinions about faith and how people wield it. Having the faith angle to it is something that I should be, but once they flipped that switch to, oh, this all isn't even real, this is a trap by Brainiac 13, I'm like, then why do I care about anything? Like, this is where it does become just a story to run out the clock on something. And that was really disappointing. It really was. I did like that they brought Crypto with them. But they sidelined Crypto pretty quick, so.
Yeah, at one point, Superman says Crypto stays here. It's like, come on, like, this dog's something to do. Like, if you're gonna, I don't know if you're gonna bring in a superpowered crypto, and not even just in this storyline, but generally, like going back to the idea of rehoming him in the fortress. It's like, well, what are we doing here? If we're gonna have crypto, let's have crypto.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with all of that. And like I said, I really had no memory of this. And the leader of the Order of Rao, Zonor, I think is his name, but he's a masked figure. And what little memory I had, I was convinced that it was Zod. That was the twist, that it turns out it was Zod. And no, that's not the case. But, when we get to the final exposition and explanation of what all of this was about. So Superman enters that Heart of Krypton machine. And this is where we get the backstory of like what happened here. So essentially after Brainiac 13 was defeated, his plan was to go back in time to the real Krypton and kill Jor-El so that Kal-El could never be born and come to Earth and become Superman. But for some reason, Brainiac 13 failed, but made out with Jor-El's journals. And apparently it turns out the Jor-El of the John Byrne post-crisis Krypton was a big fan of ancient Krypton 80,000 years earlier, yes, which was this wondrous, fantastical land, i.e. the Silver Age Krypton. And so Brainiac 13 used those journals and the Eradicator Matrix, which he was able to get his hands on, to create this faux Krypton within the Phantom Zone. And it wasn't a hologram or a projection or anything like that. It was quote unquote real. If my understanding is correct, there was a planetoid comprised of gentle beings, I think they say, within the Phantom Zone that Brainiac 13 was able to remold through the fires of the Eradicator Matrix and essentially turn it into this version of Krypton and create genetic matches to Jor-El and Lara and all of the rest. So they are physical, corporeal beings on this planet. That's my understanding, at least. I don't know if you're looking at me like maybe not.
No, what it just hit me, and I'm surprised I didn't say this. I didn't get it when I was reading the issue. So you're telling me, Anthony, that for the second time, a godlike being has crafted another version of Krypton. A pocket universe, one might say.
Yes, one might say. Yeah.
So we're going back to that well. Okay.
Yeah. And so the idea is that I guess Brainiac 13 based it on these journals of Jor-El, wanted to create this warm, inviting version of Krypton, not the cold, sterile, burn version, but a version of Krypton that would be appealing to Superman to lure him in, and then he would be there when the planet meets its end. But they threw a wrench in those works when they saved the planet. And the program continued to run past when it should. And now it's breaking down. And that's why we didn't mention this, but in Return to Krypton 2, things are falling apart. The sun is dying, right? Nobody can explain why. It's like the program can't sustain itself. And Superman's pulled out, but then Jor-El enters. And Jor-El is able to exert his will over this program and merge with it and save this version of Krypton. I do have to say, I like the moment. There's a nice moment before Jor-El goes into the heart of Krypton, where this man of science who has been doing battle with these religious zealots for 4 issues turns to Kal and says, have faith that I can do this. And I did like that moment for the two of them and for Jor-El in particular. And so he's able to save the day. Superman, there's a big splash page. Superman thinks they've died and gone to heaven, but it turns out that this was Jor-El rewriting the program, and he doesn't want any interruptions moving forward. He feels like this home of theirs needs to be free from interruption. So Kal has a choice. He can either stay or go, but he's not going to be able to come and go. And of course, Superman chooses to return home, and all of the kind of pathways to this version of Krypton are closed. So it's not a world they'll have access to. And at the very end, we have Superman conversing with the Eradicator at the fortress. And we see kind of, I think, Superman's vision of what life is like for them on this Krypton that he can no longer return to. And I think it's meant to be what is actually playing out, which is Jor-El and Lara and their young son playing. So there's another version of Superman out there.
I think the reason why I'm so negative, and I'm kind of curious if that's too strong of a word, I think is because it just wasn't satisfying as an explanation.
Agreed.
Like, it's basically like your favorite TV series just had a really lousy season finale, and they were trying to wipe up some subplot that had been baking along, and you're just like, yeah, they didn't stick that landing.
It does leave a bit to be desired. I think it's, you come out of the first Return to Krypton story on a high,
Yeah.
and then this really just kind of feels like it sputters out. And like I said, is ultimately a means to an end to kind of put the genie back in the bottle. Oh, it's just Brainiac 13 all along. You almost, I don't know. It's not that there's nothing compelling about it, but you almost wonder if they couldn't have just skipped this and dealt with it in a scene in Our Worlds at War, like in a confrontation with Brainiac 13. Like somehow you survived the Krypton I sent you to. And it's like, wait, that wasn't real. Something, you know what I mean? Like that, I guess, would have been unsatisfying in its own way, but it's like they could have done that.
But I think it also speaks to a larger issue with this era of Superman in general, is when you're getting into latter 2002 and then into 2003. A couple years ago, I had the privilege of moderating a panel with Joe Kelly at Dragon Con. We watched Superman versus the Elite, and then me and another guy kind of interviewed him. It's where I found out that he got the job as writer of Action Comics because Eddie Berganza thought he was Steven T. Seagal.
That's amazing.
So, but but afterwards, Steven T. Seagal was there because they were there together as kind of like the Man of Action package. And I actually got to have a conversation with Steven T. Seagal about his Superman run, which I have always been very lukewarm on.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, I'm not saying this to be insulting. It's not like I hated it, but I was very lukewarm on it. He goes, so was I. And he told me that the reason that his run went the way it was is because he was told, do not make any waves. We're trying to get a movie made. And with that knowledge, looking at this latter portion, because this is where they're really ramping up and wanting to get the movie made. This is where they're really like chasing that J.J. Abrams, John Peters, McG, Brett Ratner, McG version of it. And I'm wondering if they were just told, make this go away. And this was their best way of doing that.
Interesting. I mean, if I ever have the opportunity to ask anyone who's involved in this, I will, because I would be curious. But I think there's probably something to what you're pointing out in terms of that timing. So is there anything we didn't talk about with Return to Krypton that you want to before we wrap up here?
No, we covered everything. I got to talk about how I was part of the very loud and probably small voices of no, and how I think ultimately we ruined it.
Thanks a lot. No, I mean, like I said, don't be too hard on yourself. And, it's fascinating. I mean, any of this stuff, but especially something like this where you can look back on it now. It's not like it was in the moment where it's like, oh, this is a retcon moving away from established continuity. Now it's just we mentioned at the top the different versions of Krypton that we've had in the time since. So, you can look at this, I think, more for the story it is, as opposed to the potential continuity ramifications, changes, things that might have upset you at the time. So, but again, I totally get where you're coming from. But yeah, this was a really fun conversation. I appreciate you joining me for this. I always love whenever we can get together and talk Superman and compare notes. Where would you like to direct folks with respect to your various podcasting efforts?
Well, Moving Kryptonian Images continues over on It All Comes Back to Superman Series 2. Depending on when this hits, your episode is probably right around it, as yours is hitting on April 28th.
Okay, that's very close.
I will be doing, I'm starting to get these recorded too. Every once in a while during the months of May, June, and July, you're going to see some Summer of Superman specials, where I'm not talking about a movie, but talking about comics more than anything else, or Superman and Lois in one case. So yeah, that's where I'm going to be devoting all of my resources right now, podcasting wise, as It All Comes Back to Superman Series 2. Please search for that. Otherwise, you're going to find the first series and be confused at where is this giant series? But I am ramping up to finish out my recording sessions. I've got 3 next week. And I've only got like 4 more after that. And this is turning into something like I knew it was going to be big. I didn't know it was going to be like this emotional journey on my part.
Oh, that's great. No, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad that you're having that reaction and that you're really beyond enjoying the conversations and whatnot, but that you're really getting something out of it. I can identify with that feeling, and that's a beautiful thing. So I thank you very much. I thank you, audience, for tuning in. I'm happy to say my voice is finally mostly back to normal. Turns out I did have COVID after all. I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that my wife had it. I was testing negative. And then shortly thereafter, I tested positive. And so the last couple of episodes, the voice was a little bit rougher, but feeling better. Voice is getting better. But I thank you all for tuning in as always. And make sure you come back next week. It's the grand finale of our coverage of the Loeb Kelly event. We are hitting Our Worlds at War at last. So very excited to reread and discuss that. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all